very quick statement. Starley Eaton was one who graced us and blessed us every Tuesday morning with a smile. She was here even the week before she passed. She was online with us. And this particular study of Mark chapter 8 has now, this is going to hold a little bit different meaning because we're going to look at Jesus, the servant of revelation, that he is revealed through his compassion, which Starley has experienced. He is revealed through confession, which she now can actually state perfectly because she's face to face. And it's going to be revealed through the cross, that thing that Christ did for her so that she has, by his compassion and by confession, she has his presence in front of her. This takes on a pretty significant meaning because of that. And so we want to pray for the family, we want to lift them up, think about them during the week. But it's a little bit of a sad day to be sitting here looking across the screen at all the different people who joined us and not to have her smiling face there. Mark chapter 8. Last week, as Diane uncovered, we saw the heart of the Father, the heart of man, and the heart of the Son. This week, Jesus further reveals exactly who he is, and he again reveals it through his compassion. We're going to see that in the entire story of the feeding of the 4,000, a separate feeding from the feeding of the 5,000. But we see him still serving the disciples and still serving those people. We're going to see him through confession as we understand and see his issue with not only the blind man, but also the issue with Peter making this confession of faith. And then through the statement of the cross, he's going to reveal himself and make that incredible statement. Those of you that desire to come after me, deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow me. And then the statement that he makes after that, which concludes this chapter, which is a much misaligned and misunderstood statement. We're going to put some teeth to that statement today. So open with me to Mark chapter 8. There's a lot of notes for this chapter because there's a lot of things happening in this chapter. Let's launch in, beginning first in verse 1. In those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him, and now he speaks. So here's the story. Jesus, in those days, it wasn't uncommon for people to follow after a rabbi to hear him teach time and time again. What was uncommon was for there to be such a large crowd that we'll find out here in a minute stayed with him for 3 days. They actually followed him for 3 days, which means food runs out, water runs out, the opportunity to be able to fulfill the needs of the people run out. This is not like a conference you might see today where you pay your money, you go to the conference, and everything's taken care of for you. This is people following Jesus as he stops and teaches. Now, in chapter 6, we got the feeding of the 5,000. There's some differences between that particular story and this particular story, the actual incidents. Here's the first one. Verse 2, Jesus says this to his disciples, I have compassion on the multitude. Remember in chapter 6, we talked about the fact that out of his compassion, he looks at the disciples and basically says, go feed them. Now, Jesus makes this statement very clearly. I have compassion on the multitude because they've now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. They have been following him for 3 solid days. There's nothing to eat. And then he says, which was stated by the disciples last time, if I send them away hungry to their own houses, they will faint on the way, for some of them have come from a very far distance. Some of them have come from a faraway place. So he has this compassion on the people. The situation now is Jesus actually states and makes it known his compassion upon the people. And then the disciples ask this question. And friends, I got to tell you, there's a really strange thing going on here, and I'm not quite sure what it is. Verse 4, his disciples answered him and said, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? If you think back 2 chapters, Jesus basically said, go feed them. They said, what are we going to do? Take a month's worth of wages and go buy enough bread to feed them all? It was kind of a sarcastic comment. Now we get the disciples looking and saying, one can't possibly satisfy these people with the bread here in the wilderness, and yet Jesus did it the last time. You would think, and we would think in hindsight, that we would be looking at Jesus and saying, okay, we're going to go pick up whatever we can. Jesus, you're going to do whatever it is that you do, and we're going to be able to feed these 4,000 people. We would think that would be the case. But here's the convicting question. How many times has Jesus told me over and over again the same thing, that it takes me 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15 times to hear it before I actually will believe it, before I actually will be dependent upon him? So he looks at the disciples, he asked them, and he said, well, how many loaves do you have? They said 7. In the previous story, there were 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now there's 7 loaves, 5,000 people, 4,000 people. So this is another incident where the same situation is occurring, and yet there's some differences to the circumstances. So he asked them how many loaves. Maybe this is to jog their memory. Maybe this is Jesus looking at the disciples saying, are you not going to remember back just a little while ago where we fed 5,000? They said, we have 7. He commands the multitude to sit down on the ground. He takes the 7 loaves. Now I want you to watch the progression here. He takes the 7 loaves. What is the first thing that he does with the 7 loaves? He gives thanks. This is Christian principle 101. Don't forget to give thanks for what has been provided. There's an overwhelming scenario here. Give thanks for what's been provided. Then he broke it. Then he gave it to them. Then he distributed it. And he gave it to his disciples so they could go serve. Now, the reason I say this progression is really important is for this reason. When you think about communion, you think about that sacrament. We take the bread is blessed, we say thanks over it. It is then broken. But why is it broken? It's broken so that it can be distributed. Think about Jesus on the cross. Jesus on the cross, there is a thankfulness for him going to the cross for me and having his body broken for me. And when his body is broken, he can actually then be, and I'm going to put it in this interesting phrase, he can actually now indwell us. Because he's gone to the cross and is resurrected, he now, through that process, exactly what we're seeing here, that process of being broken for us, which is why he says, do this in remembrance of me, he's now giving us an example, a fast forward example as he feeds the 5,000, that through his brokenness, our needs can be met. Through his brokenness, our needs can be met, and we need to be thankful for that. If you'll remember the 2 men on the road to Emmaus, Jesus unfolds. They don't recognize him. Jesus unfolds the scriptures about himself, but they don't recognize him until he sits down at dinner. He takes the bread, he gives thanks for it, he breaks it, and he hands it to them. That's when their eyes are open, when they recognize him in the midst of his broken body, broken for them. Jesus, through his broken body, through that act, the bread of life broken for us, we see the compassion of Christ for us as his broken body now has the ability to be distributed for us, to us. And in this particular case, he now distributes the broken pieces to his disciples, so the disciples can actually now again participate in the ministry. They can go distribute as servants. They can go distribute the bread. They then set them before the multitude, the end of verse 6. They also had a few small fish. He blessed them. He set them before them. And verse 8, they ate and they were filled, and then they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. So we get again the picture. And I continue again to ask myself the question over and over again, why didn't the disciples recognize this same miraculous provision as they had previously? And again, I just think we're human. We're stubborn. Moving us to dependence on Christ is a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to move us from dependence upon ourselves to dependence upon Jesus. Notice that his provision fills them. It fills the need, which was their hunger. Notice it doesn't fill them to the point of greed, but it fills the need. 7 large baskets, a miraculous provision. They fill up the rest. Verse 9, now those who had eaten were about 4,000, and then he sent them away. So he's done teaching. He's filled them physically. He's filled them spiritually, and he sends them on their way. Now, the scene shifts. And I love, here's Mark again, verse 10. Immediately, they got into the boat. He got into the boat with his disciples, came to the region of Dalmanutha. And now, verse 11, the Pharisees show up. They came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. 2 things are going on. Jesus' compassion over the crowd has moved him to do this miraculous thing, to actually point the way to his broken body at some point. He's had the disciples serve. All the things have happened. They get into the boat. They sail to a different place. No doubt the word has spread. And here come the religious leaders. The religious leaders, the Pharisees, come down and they begin to dispute with him. And what they're asking for is a sign. Now, again, I'll put this question in front of us. They're asking for a sign, and I want to look at them and say, what just happened? Was that not a sign enough? But actually, that's not what they're looking for. The Pharisees here are not actually looking for a miracle. What they're looking for is a sign, a confirmation and an authentication of who Jesus actually is. Go do something like God did. Now, what they're not recognizing is Jesus just has done this. Where God provided manna in the wilderness, Jesus just provided food for 4,000 and did it from 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus is doing the things that God has called him to do. The difference is the Pharisees are not recognizing that particular situation. They're not recognizing that he's actually doing the things that God would do. And they're doing them out of compassion. So the Pharisees want a sign from heaven, and they're testing him. They're wanting to see if he will actually do a sign from heaven. Now, if you're a little bit like me, you'd kind of like to be looking at this thing and having Jesus go, okay, I'll give you the sign. Here's the sign. Enough said, done, finished. I just proved myself to be the Messiah. We're done. Put this issue to rest. But he doesn't do that. As a matter of fact, this is beautiful. Verse 12, he sighs deeply in his spirit. He has done miracle after miracle. He has performed and done the things that Isaiah has pointed to over and over and over again. He's made the blind to see, the deaf to hear, the lame to walk. He's preached the good news of the kingdom. He has done this over and over and over again. And they still do not see. They still will not hear. And he asked this question, why does this generation seek a sign? Why is it necessary for you to have a sign when you're not willing to look at everything that I've already done for you? Now, that's a fairly convicting thing for me because I have a tendency not to look back over all the different things that Jesus has accomplished in my life, all the different things that he's done for me. And I'm really asking the question, okay, Jesus, prove yourself again. Okay, Jesus, here's another scenario where I need you to do this. Rather than, and I love how David does this in the Psalms, in a lament psalm, what David does in a lament psalm is he says, woe is me, this is the situation. Then he reflects back on all that God has done in his life. And then he moves forward and he says, because you've done all of this, I believe you will do this. And I praise you for it. That's a lament psalm. And I wonder why in my life I don't many times go to the point of saying, let me look back over my life, over all the miraculous things that Christ has done through the power of the Holy Spirit in my life, and I don't apply that immediately to whatever my circumstance is. I'm very slow in that, and I can see myself as a Pharisee saying, okay, prove yourself again. You've done it a multitude of times, but I need you to prove yourself again. And I feel that there may be times in which Jesus sighs deeply at me, but his compassion continues to override that sighing deeply. Why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly, I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation. And you could put in parentheses this, other than what I have already done. I've given you miracle after miracle. I've preached time and time again. I've shown you from the Old Testament prophets who I am. There's going to be no sign because I've done enough. I've given you enough reason to believe. No sign shall be given. I've done actually beyond what Moses would have done. You would have believed in Moses, and yet he didn't actually do those miracles. The parting of the Red Sea, that wasn't Moses. It wasn't the staff. That was God himself. The man in the wilderness, that wasn't Moses. That was God himself. Jesus has walked on the water. Jesus has healed the deaf, the blind, the lame. Jesus has fed 5,000, now 4,000. He's done miraculously above and beyond what Moses would do, and yet they're still saying, show us a sign. Verse 13. So he leaves them. Isn't that great? I love the fact that in this particular case, he looks at them and he says, look, I've done everything I'm going to do. There's no way I'm going to convince you any more than the miracles that have just happened. And he leaves them. He gets in the boat and departs. The disciples now, listen to the disciples, had forgotten to take the extra bread. They forgot to bring the baskets of bread with them. And they did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. So Jesus now is going to take this example because you can just hear the disciples. Well, we're going to the other side. We don't have enough food for us because they forgot to bring the 7 baskets of leftovers with them. They have 1 loaf. And he charged them and he said, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. And you can imagine them going, what in the world is he talking about? Here's what he's talking about. Leaven is something that is almost invisible in bread, and yet it's essential to the bread. But leaven permeates the bread. It is this invisible and pervasive part of making bread. What he's telling them is beware of the invisible nature of the Pharisees' false teaching because it will infest, it will become invasive into my teaching. You're going to find it. You're going to find this leaven. You're going to see it. The Pharisees' teaching is going to uncover it. And here's the Pharisees' teaching. And what have they basically said? First of all, they've said, you're from Satan. Remember that? You're from Satan. All your acts, you're from Satan. But now they're saying, if you don't give us a sign, we're not going to believe. And I'll say it again. What Jesus says is, and we had this lesson a couple of weeks ago, what Jesus says is exactly the opposite. What he says is, believe and I'll reveal myself. Instead of, I've got to see it to believe it. He flips those tables. So now we get his warning, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. It is this, beware of those people that will deny who I am. And they'll deny it on the basis of things that have no basis. In other words, they're going to deny who I am because they think of Satan. You know I'm not. They're going to not deny who I am because they need to see a sign when I've done miracle after miracle after miracle. They're going to deny who I am, and that is going to become pervasive. That false teaching is going to become pervasive. It is Christ's warning to the disciples. There are going to be things that happen. There are going to be things that come up. There are going to be things that come from the Pharisees, come from the religious leaders, that if you're not careful will be like leaven in a loaf of bread. It will invisibly begin to move itself through the teaching to the point that you're going to start to ask the same questions the Pharisees are asking. He continues on. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, the reason he's saying this is because we have no bread. Don't you just have to love the disciples. They're sitting in the boat, they've forgotten about the bread, and what they really think that Jesus is giving this little bit of rebuke, this little bit of caution, is because they forgot the bread. Missing the point completely about what Jesus is trying to teach them here. Well, he's going to be angry at us. Well, when was the last time Jesus was angry at them? He's just shown compassion on top of compassion on top of compassion. And the last time they were in a boat with him, what they accused him of not being compassionate toward them. Well, he's just told them again, and this is a compassionate way to serve the disciples. He's told them the truth. Beware of the false teaching. And now they said, well, it's because we don't have any bread. It's because we forgot the baskets. He's now chiding us because we forgot the baskets. Boy, do I do that all the time. Whew. Verse 17, Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Have you really not gotten the point here? Do you really not understand? Do you still miss the spiritual point of everything that I've been telling you? Here's the proof. I've given you the proof over and over and over and over and over again, the proof of who I am by what I have done and what I have said. Verse 18, he says, having eyes, you don't see. Having ears, you don't hear. And you do not, boy, this is, wow, this one's a hard one. And you do not remember. Now, I want to make a little play here. The do not remember. It's one thing to say I don't have eyes because I'm not looking around and I'm not trying to recognize Christ in my midst. It's another thing to say I'm not hearing because I'm not hearing the compassion of Christ in my life. But it's another thing to say to me, I'm not remembering. I don't remember all the things that Christ has done. I don't remember everything that's there. And I think it's one of the reasons why he says in the upper room when he breaks the bread and says, when you eat this, do this in remembrance. Do not forget why I am doing this. Do not forget that I have done this. And I think he's saying it here again. If your eyes are blind, if your ears can't hear, okay, but don't lose your remembrance of me. Don't lose everything that I have done. You want a sign? The sign is your remembrance of all the things that I have done. Verse 19, do you not remember, to go on, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of fragments did you take up? They said to him, 12. He's reminding them again of the previous miracle. Do you not remember when this occurred? Do you not remember that these are the things that prove who I am? Also, verse 20, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said, 7. Verse 21, so he said to them, how is it that you don't understand? Let me make sure you have eyes to see. How many baskets? How many loaves? How many did we feed? You have ears to hear. We've pulled it all back together. You can hear exactly what you've said. Recall the miracle, and do you not remember the miracles that I have done? Do you not remember my compassion for you? Do you not remember that I have shown you over and over and over and over again who I am? So let me ask you a couple of questions. Have you ever experienced the compassion of Jesus? If you have, nod your heads. I'll see a whole lot. Do you take the time to remember the countless times that Jesus has shown compassion on you? Have you heard the same thing from Jesus over and over again by way of the Holy Spirit and still not acted upon it? If you have, welcome to the human race. Welcome to being a Christian who is learning and growing. But it begs the question, have you heard from Jesus through the power of the Holy Spirit something over and over again, something to do or something not to do, and still not acted upon it? Do you find that dependence upon Jesus is much more difficult than dependence upon yourself? And yet, who has more power? Who has more knowledge? Who has more presence? Who has more compassion? Final question here is, what do you think you ought to do about that? He who has ears to hear, let him hear. He who has eyes to see, let him see. Remember and act upon it when Christ shows you that compassion and actually shows that compassion for someone else. He is revealing himself as the Messiah, as the servant of the Lord through his compassion for you. And if you ever doubt it, my friends, stop and remember all of the different times that he has showered you with compassion, including him hanging on a cross for you. It begins to shift completely how we look at Jesus. He served every one of us by going to the cross. He serves every one of us by fulfilling our need. He serves every one of us by showing us time and time and time and time and time again who he is by the power of the Spirit. Amen? So he's unfolded himself. He's revealed himself through his compassion. Moving on to verse 22, now comes the second series of events where he's going to be revealed now, and he's going to be revealed through confession. So through his compassion, but now through confession, and confession by a number of people. And boy, does it get fun here. Verse 22, then he came to Bethsaida, and they, we don't know who they is, but people, brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So now we have these people that are coming by faith, bringing a blind man, and we know he's not blind from birth because in a moment he's going to recognize trees, he's going to recognize people. So this is not a blind from birth. This is something that's happened during the course of his life that has moved him to be blind. And they bring people to him so that he can just touch him. Verse 23, so he took the blind man by the hand, led him out of the town. Notice he's taking him away from all of the naysayers. He's taking him out of town so he can actually focus and concentrate on just him. Verse 23, and when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And this is a really interesting miracle because it happens in stages. Now you remember that there's a woman who was healed the minute she touched his cloak. We saw that with the hemorrhaging woman. Jairus' daughter, who immediately gets up at his word. There's a number of miracles we've seen in the past that didn't happen in stages, but this one has happened in stages. And I believe strongly it's for our benefit and it's for the benefit of the disciples, why this happens in stages. And we'll get to that in just a minute. He takes him out, spits on his eyes, and puts his hands on him and asked him if he sees anything. Verse 24, he looked up and he said, I see men like trees walking around. So obviously he's beginning to recognize things that he has seen before. He's taking this a step at a time. He makes him look up. Isn't that an interesting thing? He makes him look up. Where's the power from all this coming from? It is a power that originates with God and comes here, but he makes him look up and he sees things like trees. Verse 25. Then he put his hands on him again, on his eyes again, and made him look up again. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. There's 3 stages to this. The first stage is they bring a man who's blind. He who has eyes to see, let him see. This is as if he's talking to the disciples and he's saying, you came to me blind, not willing to look and see. And the first stage here is the stage that happens when he actually takes the blind man out of town, spits on his eyes, puts his hands on him, and he begins to see a little bit more. It's as if now he's moved his faith to the point where he's beginning to recognize, he who has eyes to see and ears to hear, now he's beginning to recognize Jesus. These stages are very typical of a spiritual walk. We all start out blind. Then all of a sudden we begin to recognize Jesus. The third stage is when we actually begin to follow him, when we actually begin to see him clearly. So these three stages, it's as if he's saying to the disciples, it's time for you to see me clearly. So he puts his hands on him a third time. He makes him look up one more time. So twice he's making him look up. And isn't it interesting that when he looks up, he can see clearly, because the first person he's going to see when he looks up is going to be Jesus. And I love that when his eyes are clearly opened and his eyes can focus, he's got a clear view of Jesus. Verse 26, he sent him away to his house and he said this, don't go into the town and don't tell anyone in the town. Here's what I think he's trying to say to the man. Don't go say anything. Let the miracle speak for itself. Don't go into town. Don't go shout this from the mountaintops. Don't go do that. I'm not ready yet to reveal things. What I really want you to do is now go back to your normal life and let the miracle speak for itself. Don't speak on my behalf. Don't speak on behalf of the miracle. Let this happen and let the miracle speak for itself. Let the miracle and the confession of just the miracle itself be the thing that points to who I am. Your words won't mean as much as the action will. The action is what means everything, and that will be enough of a confession. So we move to the next story. Now he's done this. He's fed 5,000. He's now done this miracle. And now comes the huge confession that we all know. But look at the connection between feeding the 4,000 and the miracle of the blind man. Now comes to the point where he's going to look at the disciples and he's going to say, okay, you've now seen it, you've now heard it, you now remember it because we've done two miracles of the same kind. Are you going to recognize who I am? Look at how it unfolds. Jesus and his disciples went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi. Make no mistake, going to Caesarea Philippi is not an accident, because Caesarea Philippi is where the Roman people came to pronounce Caesar as their God. This is the place that they went to announce the headship of Caesar over them. And so he goes to Caesarea Philippi, and here's what we're going to see. We're going to see the confession by the mouth of Peter. He asked his disciples, saying to them, who do men say that I am? So as you've been traveling around, what's the word out on the street about who people say I am? They answered him, and some said John the Baptist. Some said Elijah, John the Baptist who's dead now, Elijah who's obviously dead, not around. One of the prophets who are old-time prophets, they think that they've come back. Isn't it interesting that they think that these are people who have come back, and yet you get an entire line of the religious leaders, the Sadducees, that don't even believe in resurrection. So all of a sudden they're pronouncing that these guys come back from the dead. But Jesus now makes the pointed statement, who do you say that I am? So let me stop here for a minute, because this is an incredibly valid question. After you have seen his miracles in your life, after you have seen what he has done for you, after you have seen it, heard it, and remembered it, he's asking us the same question over and over again. Who do you say that I am? This is an incredibly personal question, and he's trying to move the disciples in serving them, moving them to see him for the things he has said and the things he has done, based on what you know of me and what you now remember seeing me do, hearing me say. Who do you say that I am? Because this is getting to the heart of the matter as disciples. And Peter, This is the first time, by the way, in the entire book of Mark that Peter answers for all the disciples. Peter answers and says to him, "You're the Christ." Now we know in other gospel accounts, he says, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." Here, he simply makes the statement, "You are the Christ," Christos in the Greek, Mashiach in the Hebrew, meaning you are the anointed one. You are the one we have been waiting for. This confession, this is the pinnacle. This is the peak for them to actually now publicly proclaim. And Peter's saying this as kind of the representative of the disciples. They've obviously been talking. Peter now comes forward and makes this confession of who Jesus Christ is. They don't know it all. There's still much to learn. But at least at this point, they can make this confession, this statement of faith that you are the Christ. You're the anointed one. You're the one we've been waiting for. This is a really significant statement because it's the first time he's ever really asked them. They've gone out and done things on his behalf. They've been out and they've cast out demons in his name. They've healed people in his name. They've come back. They've seen miracle after miracle. But now he asks the pointed question based on everything you know. Who am I? And they come back and they say, Peter on behalf of them says, you are the Christ. You are the one. You're the anointed one. And you want to be able to say to Peter, well done. You get a gold star for today. That gold star goes right on your test paper. You answered the question appropriately. And then he strictly warned them, verse 30, that they should tell no one about him. Well, I think there's three reasons. I've read a number of commentaries on this, and I think there's three reasons why. The first is that's going to deter him from his mission to open the eyes of the blind, have the lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear, to preach the good news. It's going to deter him from the mission because he's going to have to say over and over again, answer that question. Second, I think it's going to generate too many questions and too much opposition at this time because we now know where he's headed. But third, I think he was not ready yet to reveal publicly what was going to happen to him. He's getting ready to reveal it to the disciples, but he isn't ready yet to reveal it publicly. Because this is hard to take. And I just got to tell you, it's hard to take for them to say, you are the Christ. And then for Jesus to say, and by the way, the Christ is going to die. Because if he's actually God, in the Jewish culture, God can't die. So this can't happen, which is a really good statement about where Peter's getting ready to go. So he began to teach them about his identity. He began to talk to them specifically and confirm to his disciples that here's where he's headed. Because this is who I am, and because you've now stated that you understand that, let me tell you what my ministry is going to be about. Verse 31. So he began to teach them. And here's what he began to teach them. Now that they've got the foundation down, now that they understand who he is, here's what he began to teach them. That the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. So he's just now stated his entire mission in one sentence. You've seen everything I've done. You've seen all that's happened. Now let me tell you, and now you've confessed it. You've seen my compassion. You've heard the confession. Now let me tell you, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to suffer. I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be killed. And after 3 days, I will rise again. Jesus telling them the full scope of his mission. Notice there's an emphatic word here. The Son of Man must. This is an emphatic word in the Greek, and it is a certainty that this will happen. The Son of Man must suffer, must be rejected, must be killed, and after 3 days must rise again. It's emphatic all throughout the Greek. Verse 32, he spoke this word openly. And then here comes Peter. Peter took him aside. Can't you just see this? Jesus just makes this statement about his entire ministry. And Peter puts his arm around him, kind of walks him off to the side of the room, and basically says, Jesus, we need to have a word here about what you just said, because I'm here to tell you, you're wrong. Now, this is Peter, who just moments earlier said, you're the anointed one, the one we've been waiting for. And now he has the audacity, when Jesus tells him what his ministry is going to be, to take him aside and basically say, I'm going to rebuke him. Isn't that interesting that he rebukes? Can you imagine rebuking Jesus? Well, let me take that back, because there are times in which I've looked at Jesus and said, you're wrong. You can't possibly want to do that. You can't possibly want me to do that. There are times that I have rebuked Jesus because I've said, there's no way. You can't possibly mean that. He took him aside and rebuked him. But when he had turned around, Jesus turned around, looked at his disciples. Now he rebukes Peter. And this is a stinging rebuke. We're getting ready to pull the gold star back off the paper. So right here at the high moment of the disciples and Peter speaking on behalf, recognizing Jesus for who he is, now that gets taken back. And look at what he says. Get behind me, Satan. Remember, Jesus had been accused of doing things on Satan's behalf, being in league with him. And here's the league. The league is you're not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men. You're not thinking the way God thinks. You're not hearing me when I tell you that I am God. You're not hearing that I am the anointed one. I've agreed with you. You've said exactly the right thing. But when I've told you God's plan, you've basically said God's wrong. Peter, I'm here to tell you, that's not of God. That is of man. And it's of man driven by Satan. You are completely in the wrong here. It is a stinging rebuke. Now notice, he also has said in this statement that every single level of the Jewish culture will reject him. This is as complete a rejection as you can possibly get. The elders, who are the lay leaders, the men of wealth, the aristocrats, they will reject him. The chief priests, the ranking priests, mostly Sadducees, will reject him. The chief priests also include Annas and Caiaphas. Then you get the scribes and the teachers of the law. These were the interpreters of the law. They're mostly the Pharisees. So you get the elders, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, all of them. All of the experts in Israel's laws will reject him. It will be a complete, full rejection by the entire Jewish culture. And now he gets the rejection from his own disciples. You're not going to die. There's no way that can happen. Peter rebukes him. He gets rejected completely across the board by all. But the ones that Jesus now turns to, he turns to his disciples and he basically says, I'm here to tell you, and he's teaching them again, even through the rebuke, he's teaching them again. Let me tell you, God's plan is the plan. Keep in mind, God's plan is the plan. And here's what's going to happen. I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be killed. But you haven't heard the great news. I will rise again after 3 days. It's as if the disciples put a period after be killed. And they don't hear the last statement. We see this time and time again with the disciples. We see it at the Transfiguration. We see it in a number of different places. And we see it again in the upper room. We know Jesus says over and over again, here's the plan. And the plan is ultimately I will be killed, but I will rise again. And there's the good news. And the disciples never connect the dots until they see him resurrected in the upper room. Then all of a sudden it is, oh, that's what you were talking about. To which Jesus now will say, remember me. So now we get this huge statement. You're not mindful of the things of God, but only of the things of men. God's ways are not man's ways. This is where we land, and we see a multitude of confessions in these multitude of confessions, we see Jesus reveal himself as Messiah. Peter's confession, the healing of the blind man, the opening of his eyes. We see a multitude of ways in which the confession actually occurs, including Jesus' own confession that, yes, I am the Christ, but this is what's going to happen. And there's a couple of convicting questions. Am I blind to Jesus in my life? Do I need him? Let me ask it this way. Where do I need him to open my eyes? Are there places where I reject him? Am I mindful of the things of God in my life? And probably the most convicting question for me, do I on the one hand acknowledge him as Christ, and then on the other hand tell him he's wrong? I'm not that far from Peter, I will tell you. And many times I'm right there with him. God, there's no way. So now he's been revealed as the Messiah through compassion. He's been revealed as the Messiah through confession. And now in this last little segment, and probably one of the more difficult segments, we're going to see him revealed through the cross. Starting in verse 34, and I want to read the passage to you. There is the complementary passage to this in Matthew chapter 16. Now he calls all the people, when he called the people to himself with his disciples, so he's got a whole group of people with him, and he makes this statement: whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And remember, this comes after Peter has made his confession, and after Christ has said, Satan's behind the effort that you're getting to stop God's plan. Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Verse 35, for whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. Now, the reason I want to spend the last little bit of time here is this is a difficult statement. But I want to ask you a question to kind of start this statement, because I'm going to give you a little bit of a Greek Bible study lesson here as we walk through this. Do we think this is a passage related to salvation, or is this a passage related to sanctification? Is this a passage related to me becoming a believer, or is this a passage related to me being a believer and my actions thereafter? So the reason I'm asking that question is there's a couple of things that I need to point out to you. And let me just show you in the Greek how this is really important. You see the little word in verse 35 that says for, F-O-R? It's a little Greek word, gar, G-A-R. And what you see, especially in Scripture, when you see the word for several times, those are connectors. Those statements connect one to the other to the other. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the Matthew passage in Matthew 16, there's one more gar in there. There's one more for, and it's the very first one. For whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Now let me start there. The little word for that starts this, that's the foundation passage. Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Now, if this is a salvation passage, here's the problem. We've just made a statement about 4 things that you have to do in order to be saved, instead of John 3:16 that says, believe, or instead of Ephesians 2 that says, for by grace through faith. We have the multitude of places where it is for those who believe. That's the foundation piece for salvation. Here, Jesus would say, if this is salvation, you have to deny yourself. You have to take up your cross. and follow me, which is actually to deny yourself and take up your cross, really means you have to get to the point where you're willing to die. And I don't know about you, but when I trusted Christ, that wasn't an issue on the table. That's an issue of discipleship. That's an issue of my sanctified life. So if that's the case, if this issue is an issue related to my sanctified life, it puts this whole thing in a new context. And here's the context. The first four, the foundation piece, this is talking about following Jesus. This is not talking about becoming a believer. This is talking about following Jesus. So the second four, verse 35, this is now builds on, it's a statement that builds on the foundation piece. For whoever desires to save his life, and by the way, the word save, it's a little Greek word sozo. It is a word that only 50% of the time means saved unto eternity. It doesn't, every time you see the word saved, you do not move to the point where you deal with salvation as it relates to eternity. You talk about saved from something. You can be saved from the wrath of God. You can be saved from destruction. You can be saved from a number of different things. And this is one of those cases. For whoever desires to save his physical life. That word life there is the Greek word suke. And we're going to see it 4 times, although it's translated 2 different ways. We're going to see it 4 times in this passage. For whoever desires or wants to save his life will lose it. That word it refers to the significance of your life. So whoever desires to save his life will lose the significance of it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. This is not an issue of salvation. This is an issue of discipleship, an issue of sanctification. Now he moves to verse 36 and he says, for, so here's another statement building upon the previous one. So if I want to save my life, the significance of my life, here's what he says next. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? I need you to cross out the word soul there, because in the Greek it's the exact same word as the word for life, suke. I can't tell you why it's been translated to the word soul, but soul has an eternal meaning, not the physical life here on earth, or the significance of that life. And here's the statement he's basically making. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world, but loses his life? If I were to say to you, let's say the whole world is represented by $2 million. If I was to say to you, here's $2 million, and the moment you receive it, you will die. Does $2 million profit you any? It is of no profit to you at all. This is the point he's making. If you gain the entire world right now, which by the way is what Satan offered Jesus in the temptation, here's the whole world. If you gain the whole world right now, but lose your life, you have profited nothing. Verse 37, or what will a man give in exchange for his life? Not soul, this is life. What would you give up? In other words, every man has a price. It's an old saying of this earthly man. What's your price? What would be the price that you would be willing to give up your life for in order to gain it? Well, the fallacy of that whole statement is no matter what I could give you, if you lose your life immediately thereafter, you gain nothing. But the point Jesus is making here is this. If you live, go back to verse 35, if you desire to save your life and save the significance of your life for eternity, you are to live that life for me. And that includes denying yourself, taking up your cross, and following me. You want to save your life? Follow me. You want to lose your life? Follow the world. You want to save the significance of your life? Follow me. You want to lose the significance of your life? Follow the world. You want to save your life and the significance of it for all eternity? Deny yourself, Don't live for yourself. Pick up your cross, your lot in life, and follow after Jesus. Because if you desire to save your life, you're going to lose it. If you desire to hold on to the significance of your life here, you'll lose it all because it won't profit you anything to have that significance now and die. But if you desire to save that, if you desire to save that life, the way to do that is to lose yourself in Christ and the significance of Christ, and the significance of your life will be saved for eternity. And here's how we know. Verse 38, for whoever is ashamed of me, and what he's meaning by that is whoever will not follow me, whoever is ashamed of me and my words. This would be if I'm not willing to live a life that says this. I want to hear Jesus say, well done, good and faithful servant. I want to not be ashamed of him here. And we can go to Paul in Philippians where he says, I want to live a life that does not bring shame to Christ. Whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation. Can I make a statement that we're also living in a sinful and adulterous generation today? So this could be a statement that's really made to us as well. Of him, the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes, when Christ comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. You want to save your life for eternity? Deny yourself, follow Christ, take up your cross and follow Christ. If you want to save it fully and the significance of it here, you're only going to get here. You're not going to get the fullness of it, especially when Christ comes into his own, when he comes into the kingdom. This is why we're very fond of saying this. Whatever you do in this life matters for eternity. This is what he means when he says putting up treasures in heaven. This is what he means about the crowns of life. This is what he means about rewards and an inheritance. It is living a life for Christ now that saves that life for eternity. If you live for the world and you gain the world and you die, you've gained nothing. If you live for Christ and you lose your life, the significance of your life lasts for eternity. As a matter of fact, let me read you. This is Matthew 16, because there's even one more significant passage here. In Mark 16, this is the same conversation, but I want to read to you because in Matthew he gives verse 27. For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. The issue on the table here is living a life that has rewards for all eternity. And this is exactly what Christ did when he went to the cross. He's asking us to live a life now that will be saved for all eternity. This is what we mean by he's revealed at the cross, because it's at the cross that this beautiful, beautiful statement of the value of your life, the significance of your life now becomes known. Because he gives us purpose again. He gives us meaning again. He went to the cross to die for us so that we might live in eternity with him. And then he tacks onto that. I'm coming back. And when I'm coming back, I'm coming with my rewards. And my rewards are going to be for those who have denied themselves, picked up their cross and followed me. The rewards are going to be there because you're going to save your life for eternity. The significance of your life will be because you have placed it in following Jesus. Does that all make sense? So we get Christ revealed in Mark chapter 8. We get Christ revealed fully in his compassion for us, in the confession on who he is, and in the ultimate look at our value in Christ because of his willingness to go to the cross on our behalf. And I'll leave you with a couple of questions. Am I willing to deny myself, take up my cross, and follow him? And when he returns, which side do I want to be on? Do I want to be on the world side? Do I want to be on the side of Christ? And what am I going to do about that starting today? Man, Mark 8 is just packed. Questions, thoughts, comments? He reveals himself even more fully here. Yes, Nell.
Now,
There
can you
you go.
hear
There
me?
you go. Gotcha.
Okay. I was thinking when the blind man was sent out and
Yes.
told not to go back,
Yes.
that's like it is for us, I felt at that time, to go back to our own way of life and tell all the people what's happened to us. You go forward. They let others see Jesus in us and what he's done. If you've been blind and now you talk to people and you can see, they're going to know that
Sure.
strictly by having dealt with you and you were blind and now you see.
Hmm.
Uh, you don't have to tell them, they see.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think the miracle speaks for itself. Um, yeah. And I think the beautiful thing for us today is that kind of a miracle in our lives, changed lives, gives us the opportunity to share about who Jesus is. In his particular case, remember what was going to happen in the confession and moving on from there into him basically saying, "Follow me." He was not ready yet to make all that public, but with the blind man, I think it really is a statement about let the miracle stand for itself. Let the world see that you are no longer blind. Great point. Thanks, Nell.
I
Any
have
other
a question.
comments? Yes.
We do. A question.
Sure.
I had always heard people say, Bible teachers in the past, that if the people had believed on him back then, he could have ushered in his kingdom, so to speak. Ushered in his kingdom. But yet, he couldn't really usher in his kingdom, I guess, the way they thought, until he died. He had
Yes.
to die. So
Correct.
how do you clarify that? Is that a little vague at what people meant about ushering in his kingdom at that time?
Well, sure. I think let me put it this way. If he had come and immediately the whole world said, "You're the Christ," there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Where would we
the
go?
necessity for him to
Wouldn't
die
be.
would never have had to have been there. But he walks into and look at how he describes it here. He walks into this perverse, this sinful generation. How does he describe it again? This sinful and adulterous generation. That was a sinful and adulterous generation then. He comes into a world that's already racked with sin. And the simple fact of it is, no matter what happened, people were simply not going to believe. They simply weren't. And you had an entire nation in the nation of Israel that rejected him and rejected him so fully and so flatly. He says it here. These are the ones that are going to reject me. It's all the religious leaders that are going to reject me. So there was the necessity for him to have to go do that. And we see that. I mean, it's foretold all the way through. Go back to Genesis 3:15. We get it there. We get it in Isaiah, where God looks at the nation of Israel and says, "This is like a vineyard that has gone wild. What more could I have done?" He sees that happening, and God is continuing, especially from Moses forward. He's continuing to look for where is a faithful generation, and what he sees time and time again is there's not a faithful generation here. So it's a nice thing to say if he'd come and everybody believed, but I would have to say it this way: there was no way that was going to happen because he walks into a perverse and adulterous generation. He walks into a world that is controlled by, Ephesians 2 tells us, is controlled by sin, by Satan, by mob rule, by the sons of disobedience, by the lust of our flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. It's dominated by sin and the sin nature. That's what Jesus had to conquer first, and the only way to conquer that is through death, to be that sacrifice. So it's a nice thought. Yes, if everybody had believed, it's not realistic simply because they wouldn't. And I think it's even interesting to note that even after he's resurrected, there's some that still walk away from him.
Sure. And today, we're living
Sure.
in that perverse generation, for sure.
Yeah. Great question, though.
Yeah, really great question.
Mark,
I
Any
have
other
a
thoughts?
thought.
Yes. Hi, Jane. Yeah.
is Caesarea Philippi the same as the Philippi that Paul wrote the letters to the church there from
No.
when he was in
Different
the different-
place. Yeah. Caesarea
Okay.
Philippi Caesarea Philippi, if you've ever, well, having gone to Israel, it's an absolutely stunning place. It's where Herod had a home. The water that cascades down from the glaciers on Mount Hermon come down, and the whole place is just filled with water. But it's the place where Peter's confession is made. And as a matter of fact, there's a statement that Jesus makes in one of the other Gospels where he says, "And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell on Peter, your confession of faith." He states that right in front of a wide open hole that went down very deep that people thought was actually the entrance to hell. And he makes the statement standing right there in Caesarea Philippi that he says, this is where I'm going to make this statement that even the gates of hell, even where I'm standing in front of, that will never hold back the kingdom. It's a really dramatic one. And actually, if you go there, there's symbols of pagan gods all in the walls today. You can see them, symbols of pagan gods all chipped into the rock all around that area. So it's a different place, but it's a stunning. It's an absolutely beautiful place. But you just feel the evil sitting right there, the place that they came to actually worship Caesar. Great question. Thanks, Jane. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say was that my husband Bob Ball and Tom McNutt were inseparable friends. And when Bob was 48 years old, Dave Anderson led him to the Lord. And he played golf with Tom McNutt almost every day. He didn't tell Tom about it, but as they played and were together, Tom kept observing him. And finally he said to Bob, "I don't know what it is you have, but I want it for me and I want it for my children." And Bob led him to the Lord.
That's a beautiful example of someone who is blind and now sees, and that transformation is seen by others. And it's as if to say the miracle is what's going to open the door.
That's right.
That's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story. Thanks, Jane.
Chris has a question.
Yeah. Hey, Chris.
Hi there. In reflecting on what you said, this last passage of and looking about losing one's life, and I was just rereading, and so Jesus said to his disciples, "I must suffer.
Yes.
I must be killed," and then he talks to the
Don't forget the
people
third
and his
part.
disciples.
Don't forget the third part. And I must rise again after 3 days.
That's
yeah.
true. Must, yes. There's several musts.
Yes.
And then in that's where he said, "We must," or anyone who comes after him, he must deny himself. So there's the must.
Mm-hmm.
Take up his cross, and nowhere does he say he must suffer and die. He doesn't talk about the cross, but he talks to the disciples about the cross.
Yeah.
And like you were saying of the sanctification, take up his cross, it's almost daily, denying oneself, following me. And to me, it's the sanctification of, it's not a one-time deal of giving up my plan of and even how I pray. Well, I'm going to pray, my will be done. And how to deny oneself, all those musts of following Jesus, and how that must have turned the disciples and the people on their head. A cross was not something to celebrate.
No.
They knew exactly.
No. And I think I think there's this again is as Jesus reveals himself more and more and more, this becomes even more clear. We have the beauty of hindsight because we have the scriptures in front of us. The disciples didn't, and there's a whole lot of grace we can give the disciples for not having actually known a lot, simply because the culture was against them, their teaching was against them. But the beautiful thing about the disciples is when they meet the resurrected Christ, you see absolute transformed lives. And I think there's a beauty in that. Disciples who then were willing to deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow Jesus, even to the point of being martyred to death. Those are sanctification issues, not salvation issues. And so the beauty of it is and the more we do that, I think this is the point of this passage, the more we follow him, the more significance our life has now, and the more that significance will last for eternity. That's the beauty of it. I don't know about you. I do not want to come into the kingdom and have him be ashamed of me because I was ashamed of him.
I know.
And I think there's a beautiful statement that Paul makes in Philippians 3, where he says, as I'm looking at my death, I don't want my life nor my death to bring shame to the life of Christ. Rosemary, yeah, you raised your hand there.
Yes. Yes, I was just going to say, during the rebuke of Peter, something caught my attention there, and I don't know if what I'm going to say does apply, because it does say here that Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. And thinking of it, I was like, in this day and age when, even a pastor, or I've seen it happen several times where a man of God will make a comment, say he said it online, even if it was a bad, or it said something that is not right in the Bible, he's trying to interpret, or maybe he misquoted or missaid something. Instead of us to maybe call that person personally, or maybe send a private message, we go back online and bash the person. So I saw that, like, Peter took him, even if Peter didn't understand what Jesus was, but he took him aside. He didn't want to rebuke him in front of the disciple. I saw that. I was like, that actually is speaking volume for me, not to just go, even if I think that person is wrong or right, not to go publicly to embarrass the person. Just taking me aside could go a long way, even if I am not sure if the person is right or not. Just doing it privately, that spoke volume for me.
Yeah, it's a great point. Peter does pull him aside, but I think the irony of the case is he's just called him the Anointed One, and then he takes him aside and says, basically, the plan you've just laid out can't possibly be the plan. You've got to be wrong. That can't possibly be the plan. Even though you're the Christ, even though you're the Anointed One, you're wrong. And I think there is a graciousness to Peter that took him aside. We don't see that graciousness in a number of other cases, but in this particular case, there is a graciousness to Peter taking him aside, but that gets quickly overwhelmed by the fact that he's rebuking the Son of God. But it's a great point. And I would agree with you. When we do have questions, or when we have comments to make, when we have to make a tough statement, to do it privately, a much more gracious way to do that. Thank you for calling that out. Any final questions?
I know. I just keep thinking about with what we just finished. When C.S. Lewis said, if you put first things first, you get other things thrown in. But if you put second things first, you lose it all. And I can't help but think of that when I think about the things that we do, and the questions that you'd ask not just on the first things, but all of the things when he kept saying, for you do this, for you do this, you have eternal rewards for all of that. And wow, talk about second things getting thrown in. I would say that is all first.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Diane, because I love to say that when we come face to face with Christ, I think there are going to be, we all want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, but I think there are going to be those things that he's going to actually look at us and he's going to say something like, let me show you what I did with what you did. And there are going to be things there that we had no idea. Remember, we talked several weeks ago about little things matter in the kingdom. I think there are going to be huge things that God did with little things that we did that we thought were of no consequence at all, that he took and exploded into huge things because they were little things that were done out of obedience. There were little things that were done because we actually were following him. Little things that were done because we actually weren't ashamed of him. We actually did what he asked us to do. And I think there's a lot of that has the potential of really being huge rewards in heaven that we're not even cognizant of the fact that we're going to get them. So great point. Great point. Anything else? Well, I was a little long-winded. This was a long chapter.
Good.
But hopefully we've now moved to the point where Christ is really fully revealed. And what we're going to see next week as we launch into Mark chapter 9 is we're just going to see ultimately the servanthood of Christ come into its full blossom, its full bloom. And we're headed toward him heading to the cross. So really some significant things that are there. So we'll look at that next week. Can I close this in prayer?
Please.
Father, thank you that through the compassion of Jesus, through the confession of others, and through the cross itself, we come face to face with who Jesus Christ is. So Lord, for this lesson, may it rest heavily upon us. Really land on the question, whose side are we on? Are we fully committed to Jesus? To deny ourselves. It's not our life, it's his. It's his life in us. Take up our cross, to be willing to go where he leads and to follow him. And know that what we will save of this life will last for eternity because it's done following him. As it's been said in the past, only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. Father, our prayer is that the things that we do as we follow after Jesus will be the things that will last, and that he and you will be glorified because of it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.